This is Dr. Sunita Magre, Professor, Department of Education, University of Mumbai. Title of the course, Human Rights and Value Education. Topic, Human Rights Education. We are focusing on the topic, Human Rights Education on the following points. Historical background of human rights. What are human rights? Universal Declaration of Human Rights. What is human rights education? Dimension of human rights education. Human rights education in curricula. Models of human rights education and the methodologies for human rights education. Objectives. The learner will be able to understand human rights and human rights education, and also the models of human rights education. Analyze models of human rights education through various methodologies. Learning outcomes. At the end of this, learners will be able to explain human rights and the various aspects, articles of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Explain the concept of human rights education. Explain the curricular and co-curricular activities for human rights education. Understanding the methodologies for human rights education. Human rights are the rights which are possessed by human beings irrespective of their race, caste, gender, nationality, language, etc. According to the Fawcett, human rights are sometimes called fundamental rights or basic rights or natural rights. As fundamentals or the basic rights, they are those which must not be taken away by any legislature or any act of government and which are often set out in a constitution. Study of human rights divided into three main heads: universal protection of human rights, regional protection of human rights, and national protection of human rights. According to Indian perspective, in Vedas, about the entire world is one family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam addresses the question of human rights. In 1250, a significant event in the development of human rights, when the rebellion of the feudal barons against King John of England brought about the proclamation of Magna Carta. In 1675, Habeas Corpus Act passed and Magna Carta becoming an official law. In 1775, French Declaration of Rights of the Man and Citizen. In 1850, the United States abolished slavery by adding the 13th Amendment. In 1900, women are allowed to vote in Britain. In 1945, 51 countries joined together to form the United Nations and to pledge themselves to take joint and separate action to protect human rights. It was followed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the General Assembly in 1948. In 1966, Convention on Economical, Social and Cultural Rights and Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And lastly, in 2000, is the decades for the human rights education. What are human rights? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted by the UN Commission on Human Rights chaired by the First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. The UDHR was adopted by the 56 members nation of the UN General Assembly on December 10, 1948. On December 10, 1948, the General Assembly of United Nations declared the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. December 10 is celebrated around the world as International Human Rights Day. 192 member states in the UN upon membership agreed to educate their citizens about the principle of UDHR. Most of these countries have incorporated the principle of UDHR in their constitution. The UDHR specifies minimal condition of a dignified life. Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Human rights are universal They are birthright of every member of human family. Human rights are inalienable. You cannot lose these rights any more than you can cease to be a human being. Human rights are indivisible. You cannot be denied a rights because someone decides that it is less important or non-essential. Human rights are inherent. Human rights do not have to be born or earned. It is inherited. They belong to people simply because they are human. So human rights are inherent to each individual. Human rights are interdependent. All human rights are part of complementary framework. Human rights are both abstract and the practical. Human rights refer to right and fundamental freedom, which are entitlements of human beings, often held to include human rights to life, human rights to liberty, human rights to freedom of thought, and human rights to expression, and human rights to equality before the law. Universal Declaration of Human Rights gave 30 articles on human rights. Article 1, right to equality. 2, freedom for discrimination. 3, right to life, liberty and personal security. 4, freedom from slavery. 5, freedom from torture. 6, right to recognition as a person before the law. 7, right to equal protection. 8, right to remedy by competent tribunal. 9, freedom from arbitrary. 10, right to fair public hearing. 11, right to be considered innocent until proven guilty. 12, freedom from interferences with privacy, family, home and correspondence. 13, right to free movement in and out of the country. 14, right to asylum in other countries from persecution. 15, right to nationality and freedom to change. 16, right to marriage and family. 17, right to own property. 18, freedom of belief and religion. 19, freedom of opinion and information. Right 20, right to peaceful assembly and association. 21, right to participate in government and free elections. 22, right to social security. 23, right desirable work and to join trade union. 24, right to rest and leisure. 25, right to adequate living standard. 26, right to education. 27, right to participate in the cultural life of community. 28, right to social order assuring human rights. 29, community duties essential to free and full development. 30, freedom from state or personal interference in the above rights. What is human rights education? The Council of Europe Human Rights Education Youth Program defined human rights education as educational programs and activities that focus on promoting equality in human dignity in conjunction with programs such as those promoting intercultural learning, participation and empowerment of minorities. Its aim is always the development of culture of human rights. The mandate for human rights education is unequivocal. You have a human right to know your rights. The preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights exhorts every individual and every organ of society to strive by teaching and education to promote the respect for these rights and freedoms. Article 30 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declares that one goal of education should be the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. United Nations Decade of Human Rights Education in 1994, the General Assembly defined human rights education as a lifelong process by which people at all levels of development and in all strata of society learn respect for the dignity of others and the means and the methods of ensuring that respect in all societies. The World Program, the Plan of Action for the decade, further defines human rights education as training, dissemination, and information efforts aimed at the building of universal culture of human rights through imparting of knowledge and skills and the molding of attitudes which are directed to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedom, the full development of the human personality and the sense of dignity, the promotion of understanding, tolerance, gender equality, and friendship among all the nations, the enabling of all persons to participate effectively in free society, the furtherance of activities of the United Nations for maintenance of peace. The declaration highlights three key dimensions of human rights education. Education about human rights, education through human rights, and education for human rights. Education about human rights, which includes providing knowledge and understanding of human rights norms and principles, the values that underpin them, and the mechanism for their protection. Education through human rights, which includes learning and teaching in a way that respects the right of both educators and the learners. Education for human rights, which includes empowering persons to enjoy and exercise their rights and to respect the rights of others. Childhood is the ideal time to begin lifelong learning about and for human rights. Human rights learning seeks to foster feeling of confidence and social tolerance, the human fundamental basis of the whole culture of human rights, to value self and others, to recognize and respect human rights in everyday life, to understand one's basic rights and be able to articulate them, to appreciate and respect differences, to acquire attitudes to address conflicts in non-violent ways that respect the rights of others, to develop children confidence in their ability to take action and their skills to defend and promote human rights. Human rights education in curricula. The formal curricula, school may choose to examine their present curricula and identify areas where themes and elements of human rights already exist. They should critically judge a need of introducing human rights as a separate subject or to introduce as a separate unit of the social studies subject. The informal curricula, human rights education can also be promoted through the extracurricular and co-curricular activities of schools. Human rights education can also be added to the hidden curricula, that is culture of school, teachers training institution and programs, ethical values, attitude and knowledge should be integrated into the students' personal experiences in order to help them view reality in ethical perspectives. Emerging models of human rights education by Felisa Tibbets. Education has a complex and demanding role to play in upholding human rights, supporting human development, and promoting civil society. In order for human rights education and human rights thinking to be a lasting contribution to human rights culture in other respective countries, we need to understand the distinct models of human rights education that are found in practice and to clarify their link with social change strategies. There are three models or approaches to human rights education: value and awareness model, which is also known as socialization model; accountability model, which is also known as professional development model; and transformational model, is also known as the activism model, are presented into the learning pyramid. Value and awareness model. In value and awareness model, the main focus of human rights education is to transmit basic knowledge of human rights issues and to foster its integration into public values. Public education awareness campaign. Public awareness campaign and school-based curriculum are the program for value and awareness model. Value and awareness model includes human rights related lesson within citizenship, history, social sciences, and law related education classes in school, and infusion of human rights related themes into both formal and informal program. Public awareness campaign involving public art and advertising, media coverage, and community events also be classified under this model. Accountability model. Under the accountability model, participants are already expected to be directly or indirectly associated with the guarantee of human rights through their professional roles. Human rights education focuses on the ways in which professional responsibilities involve either directly monitoring human rights violation and advocating with the necessary authorities, or taking special care to protect the rights of people for whom they have some responsibility. Under the accountability model are the training of human rights and community activities on techniques for monitoring and documenting human rights abuses and procedure for registering grievances with appropriate national and international bodies are the example of accountability model. Model 3, that is the transformational model. In the transformational model, human rights education program is geared toward empowering the individual to both recognize human rights abuses and to admit their prevention. In some cases, whole communities, not just the individual, are treated as a target audience. This model involves techniques which is based partly on developmental psychology that involves self-reflection and support within the community. Methodologies for human rights education. Didactic methodologies. This teaching and learning process is one oriented towards the delivery of the content to learners. It can intersect with schools and other environments influenced by traditional culture of education in which there is a distance between educators and learners. Such methodologies reflect the banking approach and are associated with the value and awareness approach. Participatory or interactive methodologies are now invariably used in human rights education. These are seen as a means of motivating and engaging learners in the learning process. Participatory methodologies used for human rights education which result in engagement in the actual teaching learning practices and is associated with the accountability and transformative model. Empowerment methodologies are oriented towards the cultivation of agencies in learners through specific capacities such as leadership development and the integration of practices of non-discrimination in one's work roles, most closely with the accountability model and the transformative model. Transformative methodologies encompasses and extend methodologies of instrumental empowerment. Both sets of methodologies are intended to cultivate agency in the learner. Key takeaways of the course: human rights are the rights which are possessed by human beings irrespective of their race, caste, sex, nationality, language, etc. Human rights are universal, inalienable, indivisible, inherent, interdependent, abstract, and practiced in nature. Human rights education as training, dissemination, and information efforts aim at the building of a universal culture of human rights through the imparting of knowledge and skills and the molding of attitudes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights highlights three key dimensions of human rights education. Education about human rights, education through human rights, and education for human rights. There are three models or approaches to human rights education: value and awareness, accountability model, and transformational model. Didactic, participatory or interactive, empowerment and transformative are the methodologies for human rights education. Points for reflections. Review at least 2 researchers on human rights education based on models as well as methodologies of human rights education, and suggest the curricular and co-curricular activities in educational institutions for the development of a culture of human rights. And these are the further readings to understand this topic very well. Hope you will enjoy the session. Thank you very much.